cystitis, which probably is the granddaddy of all chronic pelvic pains. So there I have presented the view that this is a neuropathic condition with secondary myofascial involvement of the pelvic sphincter. So I have used a caudal catheter for about 20 days. See, all these people, all these pains, they have a wind up over a period of time. You can't expect to unwind them with just one block or even a stimulator. I have treated many patients who have had stimulators inserted and removed also. It's a very costly exercise. Insertion at 5 lakhs and excision at another few lakhs. So, you do have to explain to the patient that there is, and when you look at stimulator literature, you have to see that the experts opine that 60% of the patients get 60% of result. So you can imagine how much ambiguity is there. So better to go for simpler techniques, and cognitive behavioral therapy, wonderful in these patients.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Murali. Thank you so much. It was a good discussion. Thank you. We will be missing you, but don't worry. I'll pass on the questions to you. We call upon the last speaker of the day for this hall, Dr. Arun, good friend of mine from Bangalore. He'll be speaking on interventional pain management in head and neck pain. Quite a complicated stuff, but let's see how much easy he can make it for us.
I'd like to thank the organizers for calling me, and complicated for you, I'll give the simplest thing which I can do. So, don't do anything. Sorry, I'll just start this off. Now, I was asked to talk about headache and neck pain, interventional management of headache and neck pain. What I looked at and what I decided to do was talk about 2 or 3 very straightforward things. I think what people do a lot, and I know people in the chair actually have done much more of it and then done for years together. So any questions, please direct it there. Headache and orofacial pain. Now, the reason headache and neck pain and orofacial pain are difficult to manage is because it's multiple systems. It's not just the one face or one head, one place where it hurts. Now, you have to look at multiple systems in terms of the nerves, in terms of the muscle structure, in terms of intracranial issues. So you're looking at a lot of different things to try and sort out what exactly you want to do. And especially if you're talking about interventions, you have to really go through the nitty-gritty to try and see if you can actually target anything. Now, it's difficult to do as such. So main things are, as usual, history. Now, in headache and neck pain, you can use a lot of diagnostic tools. Now, MRI and CT are available almost everywhere. So they are very good at picking up some modalities in terms of headache and neck pain. And unfortunately, these patients are patients who can be dealt by a huge number of specialties. ENTs people see it, neurologists see it, neurosurgeons see it, dentists see it, maxillofacial, psychologists. Now I've written plastic surgery. People will wonder why, and we see it in the pain clinic. Now plastic surgery I've written because I know one of my plastic surgery colleagues started to do surgeries for migraine. And they've actually started to publish data, which is very interesting. They go at one of the vessels, this thing at the back to release it. Now, the International Headache Society from the Neurological Association, they've published a huge list of headaches. That's as big as it gets. That covers almost every kind of headache which a person can have. They've given it about 14 different criterias. What does, a lot of it doesn't matter to us significantly. Things like alcohol-related carbon monoxide doesn't matter to us, or viral usually gets sorted out by the medics. We are more interested in these. Migraine, they do crop up in our OPDs not infrequently because they've tried every medication and then they don't know what to do with it. Tension headaches are very common nowadays. Trigeminal autonomic cephalgias. Now, cluster headaches and hemicrania. I'm actually seeing less of these now because my neurologist is managing most of them. things like trauma, craniotomies, and whiplash. Now, whiplash is something which will grow in India. Now, we don't see a lot of whiplash, we don't talk about whiplash, but it is going to grow because the number of road traffic accidents is phenomenally increasing and nobody wears a seat belt. So, there's no way, it's just going to grow. And other things like which cause facial pain, things like sinuses, teeth, mouth, these are again things which we would get involved with, and painful neuropathies. Now, mainly trigeminal, to a certain extent occipital and glossopharyngeal or frontal supratrochlear as part of trigeminals. Now, that's how the head looks. You've got a huge number of nerves in front, in behind. You've got all that. The front is actually everything is trigeminal. At the back, you get every kind of nerve, mainly, but from C1, C2, C3. Now, Madam was talking about this area where they're targeting this complex. So, most of the contribution is C1, C2, and C3 in terms of headaches. If you start looking at places to stick needles in, those are the places you can stick needles in the skull. Starting from way back, lesser occipital, greater occipital, greater auricular, auriculotemporal. Then you have your frontal, supratrochleus, trigeminals, and your infraorbital and mental. So people can stick needles everywhere. Now, is it worth it? Should we be sticking it? That's another question. Now, I'm going to do 3 of these things. Now, trigeminal is the most common intervention which a pain physician would like to perform, because they think that sticking a needle, it cures most of those patients. You would be surprised that a lot of these patients just keep going around somewhere else, because whatever kind of intervention you try, trigeminal neuralgia is something which can keep recurring, and these patients tend to just keep going around in circles. More often in females than males, more often on the right side than the left side. Not working. More often after 50 years of age. Now, that is an interesting thing, because the older patients tend to get trigeminals more often, and these are the patients which the surgeons would not like to touch because they are not fit enough for a surgery. So, about 90% of these trigeminals do not have an underlying cause. They are idiopathic. Now, about 10% do have an underlying cause, and this needs to be ruled out. Whether it's a tumor, whether it's a compression, whatever it is, it needs to be ruled out. And most of them will come to you after having an MRI. They won't be, most of them, the surgeon would have already done an MRI and then moved them across. But trigeminal neuralgia is a pure clinical diagnosis. That's got nothing to do with an MR or a CT or anything. It's just a pure clinical diagnosis. Pain is paroxysmal, it's unilateral, very rarely bilateral, may be provoked by even the lightest touch, or even things like air moving on their face, or they're going out on a cold winter day. Pain is usually confined to the trigeminal distribution, does not go anywhere else. So if somebody is talking about pain in the face and headache at the back of the head, unlikely to be just trigeminal. And its sensory examination is essentially normal if you can manage to do it, because a trigeminal neuralgia patient will not usually let you touch their face. It will be that bad when they come in. Now, usual component is the V2 or V3. That's the commonest, V2 and V3 combined. Less common ones are just the V3 or just the V2. V1 is very unusual to happen. As I said, about 60 to 70% are female patients. Most of them are on the right side. Now, what do you have in terms of options? I've written medications as the first. I'm supposed to be talking about interventions, but still the gold standard of treatment for trigeminal neuralgia is carbamazepine and oxycarbamazepine. That still stays as a gold standard and it's been like that for the last 30, 40 years. In spite of the newer anti-neuropathics, everything else, this is still something which works in these patients. And actually giving a dose or giving a trial is worthwhile, because if they respond, you can actually think of doing other things if they have problems with the medication. Other things are, people do try local injections, things like supraorbital or maxillary or mandibular. These are usually confined to patients who've got single area lesions, especially the supraorbital. Some people do prefer doing a supraorbital rather than going in for a trigeminal, because you have the complications of having a dry cornea if you burn the trigeminal nerve. Obviously, the other alternatives are what we are very happy to do. Things like sticking steroids, balloon compression of the trigeminal ganglion, or sticking phenol onto it. Some people, more common nowadays is an RF, either a thermal RF or a pulsed radio frequency. Now, the only difference is pulse does at about 42 degrees, and it has been shown to have some improvement. Now, there are not randomized control trials between pulsed and thermal RF, so thermal is still better than pulsed, but pulsed is less invasive and it's less harmful. So if a pulsed works, that's probably better. Some people say pulse will work for only about a year or 2 years and then it'll come back. But you just need to have one patient with a thermal RF and anesthesia dolorosa to actually give up doing it, because they will not leave you. They'll keep coming back to you because the pain would be worse than what would have been before. Surgeons always like to do things on it. If they are not allowed to do MVDs, they would talk about gamma knife and radiosurgery. I think people do offer it, but the failure rate with radiosurgery and gamma knife is much higher than actually this thing, RF is. So if a patient can go through an RF, I think probably that is much better than putting them through a gamma knife. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about doing the procedure. It's as simple as that. You're looking at targeting the foramen ovale, and at the petrous, you're looking at targeting the foramen ovale about there, and trying to get a needle into the area. Usually use a stimulator to actually see if you are onto V2 or V3, and then try and target it and burn it if you can. I would now either burn it or I would do a pulsed RF. Most of the younger patients, I would rather do a pulsed RF. Slightly older ones, I still err on the side of doing a thermal RF, because I don't do them awake. I tend to do them under sedation, because putting the needle into the ganglion, around the ganglion, is painful. The patients immediately jump as soon as you stick a needle next to the ganglion. So they will immediately jump. So I do it under a bit of sedation. So I tend to do a thermal on the elderly patients because I don't want to keep getting them back. Usually you'll have your patients who've had this. This is always nice. They would have had multiple dental work done. Half of them would have had half the teeth knocked off because they kept complaining of pain there. Most of them will come and say they kept taking out teeth every time they went back to them and still nothing improved. The other thing I'm going to quickly talk about is cervicogenic headaches. Now, whiplash, as I said, I know people don't believe in it, but it is coming out big time, and there is a lot already in Western literature, especially with the road traffic accidents. They are high-intensity injuries in the West, but that's because they have a seatbelt on. In our population, even low-intensity injuries actually cause a lot of whiplash injury. Degenerative changes can also produce a picture similar to whiplash injury, which is basically a cervicogenic headache. Now, what are you looking at? You're looking at a unilateral headache or sometimes facial pain, again rarely bilateral, usually occipital. Occipital, some very rare to have frontal or temporal components, but they can have. Long-standing ones can have a frontal or temporal component to it. But usually it's an occipital headache. Intermittent severe attacks, especially triggered by movements of the head. A sudden movement of the head triggers the headache on, and they may have migraine-like symptoms. Things like nausea and vomiting will be associated with them. Now, investigations, usually all of them will have a CT MR, but most of them are, there's no use in doing these CTs and MRs. In an acute injury, for an acute whiplash, yes, you do have to do a CT to make sure that the components are fine, but for a chronic whiplash injury, it doesn't really provide you any benefit. What exactly is a whiplash? Basically, if anybody decelerates or stops suddenly, the head tends to go forwards, pulling all the posterior ligaments across. You tend to have injury to all the posterior ligaments, and then as soon as it hits the brake completely, you may have the head falling back completely as well. So you do have this kind of a front and back injury on the head. And you have injury to all the anterior components and the posterior components of the spinal, of the vertebral column. So you're looking at pain generators, especially in this region, especially around the C5. Treatment options are numerous. Cervicogenic headaches, the acute setting. In the acute setting, any whiplash injury should actually be treated mainly by rest for a couple of days, pharmacological management, and then mobilization, physiotherapy and mobilization. Local things like TENS, packs, hot packs, cold packs, and acupuncture do provide significant relief. A lot of initial pain is actually muscle spasm. So acupuncture, dry needling actually provides a lot of benefit to these patients in the initial period. But patients who've had chronic cervicogenic headaches, it's unlikely to produce a significant benefit unless you tackle other regions as well. Interventions, now people are happy to do root blocks or facet joint injections. A lot of people do Botox injuries. Now, favorites would probably be facet joint injections, RF nucleolysis, and occipital nerve stimulators. This is again a take from the spinal cord stimulators. People are starting to put occipital nerve stimulators for chronic occipital headaches. Surgeons would be happy to do joint fusion so that nothing moves, nothing hurts. That's their philosophy. Facet joints, what you have to see in a neck pain or a cervicogenic headache is unfortunately we do not have images or testing methods to say which one hurts. So we go by clinical details. Now this is from 1996. Now basically what they've described is if you're looking at headache in that region, it's likely to be C2, C3, more likely C3 alone. That area would be C3, C4, C4, C5, C6, C7. Now, you have to decide where exactly you want to target, or you have to have a localized targeting depending on what clinical features you get. So, a clinical examination is in the forefront. You have to go by clinical examination on what you want to target in terms of cervical spine. Lumbar spine, it's easy to stick needles into 4 levels and do things, but cervical spine, you just get one root or one facet wrong, you'll be in the cord or in the vertebral artery. So you do really have to localize on how few you do there. And the first would be a diagnostic facet joint injection followed by an RF if required. Targets are, as expected, your medial branches from those nerve roots. Now C4, C5, C6 is the commonest, so that tends to get targeted. And targeting C5, C6 is the most difficult one because either you do it lateral or some people do it prone, depending on what you feel comfortable with. My approach would be initially do a diagnostic block. Why? There are a couple of papers, now this is all from 93, 94, Barnsley et al. They actually randomized patients to have a facet joint injection to try and see if it works. Now they had a comparison between lignocaine and bupivacaine in 47 patients. Definitely bupivacaine provided a longer relief in about 34, but only about 44 had relief, and then 34 had longer relief with bupivacaine. That means there is something going on there, and that means that whatever they were doing, something was right. They went on and did an RF also, and about 60% patients showed long-lasting improvements. Now, in my pain clinic, if I produce 60% patients having good relief, I would be very happy, because otherwise your option is to sticking on to oral medications. Now, these were all selected after a placebo-controlled diagnostic block. So you do a diagnostic block, then do your RF. Even then, only about 60% succeed. So you're looking at minuscule numbers, but you have to go that way if you have to do an RF in the cervical area. A more recent one from the Korean Medical Science Journal, 68% showed improvement at 6 months, with 34 showing improvement, 100% improvement in pain. Now, this is again for chronic cervicobrachialgia. These are not acute patients, they are all chronic cervicobrachialgia. Now, 34% showing 100% improvement at 6 months is actually a very good number. Even though everybody else will say we should get 100%, but we'll never get 100% in most of our patients. So what do I normally do? I would do a pulsed RF to C2 if I think it's an occipital root, or I'll do an RF denervation of C4, 5, and 6, usually with about 80 degrees for about 60 seconds and 2 lesions. Now, only other treatment I'm going to just quickly talk about is this, blood patch. Now, a lot of us would have done blood patch for lumbar spinals, post-cesarean section, post-spinal headaches. Now, they went ahead and did about 66 patients with chronic whiplash-associated disorders. That's bad, whiplash-associated disorders. They did they showed a CT leak in about after 33 months in them, and then went ahead and did a blood patch. 37 of them had significant improvements, especially in things like memory loss, headaches, dizziness, visual impairment. So they're trying to show that there is actually associated injury to the spinal cord at the level of the dura, and you can probably block it with a thoracolumbar leak. Now, one of my neurologists is very keen on asking me to give blood patches for headaches, chronic headaches, which they call as low pressure headaches. They want us to try blood patches. Now, NIMHANS is trying some of that, and surprisingly, they're having good results. I don't know when they're going to start publishing it, but for low pressure headaches, they want to do chronic cervical blood patches. Not very easy. When I do a lumbar blood patch itself, I wonder twice, but for a cervical region, it's really unusual. Now, the only other thing I'll quickly talk about is occipital neuralgia. Mainly C2, C3 are involved from there. And either you can put them on medications, or you can actually, best of the thing is actually doing local greater occipital nerve blocks. Now, tomorrow we'll probably show them as well, because ultrasound guided greater occipital nerve blocks are very easy to perform on an OPD basis. You can actually sit the patient down, do it, and send them home within about 20 minutes. And they seem to work very well. Both anecdotally and literature-wise, I think there is some evidence coming out in doing these blocks. And as an OPD-based procedure, that gives us the advantage that we don't keep the patients in, we don't increase their costs. And towards this, probably ultrasound is the best thing which has happened again to both acute pain and chronic pain. Other things I have not mentioned or talked about are TM joint dysfunctions, glossopharyngeal neuralgia. I have not mentioned that. That's probably another good topic on facial pain. I don't have a lot of personal experience. I've done a few, but I don't have a lot of personal experience on it. Myofascial pains, again, the reason I skip these are most of them are not for intervention. You have to manage them otherwise. So that's the reason why I skip them. But most of these can still come to the pain clinic. I think they should come to the pain clinic because we can offer a diagnostic tool for most of these headaches. And if you can diagnose the root cause of the headache, you can actually treat them. And that's one reason why I think you should have a very good rapport with your neurologist and a neurosurgeon to actually start sending these patients more to this thing, more as a diagnostic tool rather than a therapeutic tool. We might improve some, but we may not, but we'll at least tell the patient where the pain originates from. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. An excellent hand mic. An excellent lecture. I think we had an ocean of discussion about head and neck pain and pelvic pain and of course regional anesthesia and all. And the topic is open for discussion and probably start.
Actually, there are wonderful lectures both by Dr. Vas and Dr. Arun. I have certain comments to make, and in addition to what he has said. And there is evidence that the trigeminal ganglion has a communication with the C2. So a lot of these patients, somebody who has been treated for migraine as a trigeminal neuralgia, just a superior the superior occipital nerve block has treated. So there is treatment for trigeminal neuralgia with occipital nerve or the peripheral nerve stimulations. So that is one thing that is very interesting. Number two, the headache, both mandibular and temporal headaches, and I have to able to treat a couple of them. So if you look for a tenderness in the sternal muscles, and they are responsible because just like trigeminal neuralgia that patients had the teeth removed for trigeminal neuralgias, but just only last week we had a patient who had a pain in the mandible and the trigger points were completely relieved. Now we are mentioned about surgery for migraine headache, because nobody knows about what exactly whether a vascular lesion or is it a neurological cause of headache. Particularly when you patient migraine headache, then you press the temporal vessels and the headache improves. The people who are tight band, that's work. So that is a vascular component to it. Though some surgeons, plastic surgeon actually from Syria, he had tried ligating these 4 vessels, both temporals and occipital. And with I have a patient who was treated by the same surgeon and came here, and he was relieved for about 7-8 years. Then he has some recurrence. And I did, only one component was left there, so he injected there and he was got better. So and he doesn't produce any ischemia. So by tying, ligating all these 4 vessels has cured his migraine headache. Then about the glossopharyngeals, that's very common and that's what I also do.
Anything you want to add, Arun? But as sir rightly pointed out, the cervical component definitely does. We keep seeing patients coming with the classical trigeminal with the discomfort, also complaining about C2, C3 distribution. And probably once we are aware of that one, probably we are able to diagnose much more patients.
No, occipital neuralgia is actually C2 neuralgia. And
yeah, Arun?
No, I know, you have loads of experience. My only this thing is,
no, I got it.
Theoretically, what I see, I agree that they have a lot of cervical component. Now, the problem is they've had this trigeminal neuralgia for such a long time, and they keep their head in such fixed positions. Don't know whether a lot of myofascial component starts playing up and starts giving them neck pain. I've had quite a few patients who complain of neck pain. And I know the question is whether I stick something to C2, C3 and then see there.
not all patients, not all patients.
Not all
But
patients.
you have a point. Yes, it is there.
And about facet joint arthropathy, actually it's today it is much more demarcated. The referral pain from cervical facet and arthropathy is very demarcated. And it's a large section of neck pain that is really undiagnosed.
Dr. Dash, something about that.
Yeah,
He'll complete the trigeminal, then we'll come.
see about the trigeminal neuralgia, as you told, the males, but if females you have told, but in the literature, I mean the Indian literature, whatever has been published, there is male preponderance. I don't know why. That also has been highlighted by Dr. Saini and by me in our publications. And about the gamma knife, as you told rightly, I think I had, when I was in All India Institute, I had given so many patients who had undergone gamma knife, did not get relief because a gamma knife takes 6 months. Of course, Salman Khan is doing very well. And the gamma knife will be effective if there is venous loop compressing the trigeminal root. If there is artery crossing over the trigeminal root, then gamma knife may not be useful. And following surgery also we have given anhydrous glycerol injection as well as radiofrequency coagulation. The patient do very well. I think one point you missed, Dr. Arun, that is sphenopalatine neuralgia, which has to be differentiated from the trigeminal neuralgia because sphenopalatine neuralgia pain is infraorbital in nature, lateral surface of the nose, which is a dull, continuous pain. It is not a neuralgic pain. It is a dull, continuous pain, and there will be lacrimation and nasal secretion. These are the very distinguishing characteristics of sphenopalatine neuralgia, which is very, I think you should have mentioned about that. This is about the trigeminal. And of course, recently we have done the study which you must have seen, which has been published in Neurosurgery in 2012, February issue. We had compared the anhydrous glycerol and the radiofrequency coagulation in a randomized controlled study in 79 patients. And in around 70 to 80% of the patients we had done MRI, and MRI was positive. Positive meaning there is vascular contact, either an artery or venous loop compressing the trigeminal ganglion. And these patients, some of the patients, I mean majority of the patients, they remain pain-free for a long time. And once it recurs, they may have to go for surgery.
I think you're right that sphenopalatine headache is also underdiagnosed problem. They are also do RF for
Yes.
Another case, I think we have recently treated one cluster headache patient with the the spinopalatine ganglion block, that to an anesthetist who insisted, sir, you give. And he's doing well for more than 6 months or 9 months now.
Cluster headaches I've seen occasionally. Some of them, they've
Yeah,
demanded
but-
100% oxygen as treatment. Some of them have given
But
block.
in one young lady, it provided only relief for 1 day or something, then it was not.
Arun, there is a query about a glossopharyngeal neuralgia. How do you?
No, pharmacological is probably something I would try initially. Now, last few glossopharyngeal neuralgias we've had, both me and my ENT surgeons looked together and then we've actually done a CT. And out of, I think, 4 we did CTs, 3 had an elongated styloid process. And he's in the process of actually operating on them. He's had a few experience from UK as well in terms of operating for styloid process. So you actually need to look at a root cause as well. So if it is there, they probably might do better. Now we have injected glossopharyngeal neuralgias as well, both from inside and from outside. And the patients who've had this thing, we've had only temporary relief, not had permanent relief. Tried and pulsed RF, not significant benefit. I'm very hesitant in doing any ablative procedures on young patients. Like most of them are non-malignancy. They are, so I'm very hesitant to doing ablative procedures on them. I don't know how well a pulsed RF will work because I've not pulsed it. So because pulsed RF, if you look at the theory behind it, it should be near a ganglion. And where you get glossopharyngeal, there is absolutely no ganglion next to it. So I don't know whether it will work, but if I fail on injecting, usually it's medical management or a styloid process to make sure the surgeon treats it.
Yeah, actually, Arun, in our center, probably maybe what a styloid excision was done, proven elongated and all. If you ask me, I admit it did not really make much difference. Again, you're back to elongated styloid. I'm just giving in our centers this thing. And as I rightly said, the pharmacological management is helping comfort, but many people, they come back that the side effects are affecting them in day-to-day work and all. We have been doing series of injections. And the only thing, one of our neurosurgery department, what they do, something like Genetous procedure, what you do for taking out, putting Teflon pad between the vascular loop and nerve. Say if there's a vascular loop and a glossopharyngeal component, then they're doing the Teflon, the results are very good. Let me put it. As I am also very much worried about putting an RF needle over there for pulse. So cluster of such important structures are there. I would not like to put RF myself.
Now, see, we have done few cases of glossopharyngeal neuralgia. Just take the, what is that, angle of the mandible and the tip of the mastoid, just midline. There is, you go and hit the styloid process and little guide inwards. Of course, there is a big vessel is there, which you'll have to...
We've done
okay.
both outside
But we
and
have
inside.
seen good result in some of the cases.
Injections, many people are doing well,
Yeah.
but as they rightly point out, actually I am worried. I am scared.
No, no, everybody is worried.
Blocks work, and you have to tell the patient, look, this is the only way to break the pain spasm
Madam,
cycle.
maybe, I don't know. RF, have you done?
I have not done RF for this. One of the things is topical lignocaine, topical amitriptyline, by the way, tablet dissolved, amitriptyline tablet dissolved and massaged into the glossopalatal fold helps them in crescendo pains and in brushing their teeth and things like that. I'm talking about glossopharyngeal. So these are simple, stupid remedies which work. And coming back to what Dr. Dash was talking about, injections, these injections are done a lot in cancer patients. In cancer patients. And in cancer patients, somehow or the other, we hit the styloid very well. In a normal patient, it is not so easy. I think cancer patients, they would have removed the sternocleidomastoid because of their commando or modified commando or whatever surgery. And as a result, the styloid is easy to locate, but normal patients not so easy.
Madam, about your CRPS, those are all type 1 or type 2? And how many were type 2?
There were about 6 type 2s and 120 CRPS.
What happened to those type 2 patients?
Type 2 patients, they do very well with the movement and other things. But the type 2 part of it, that is, you see one girl had a ulnar nerve palsy, or rather, ulnar nerve was injured after supracondylar fracture. So the nerve damage continues. The CRPS is gone, but she developed a clawing of the little finger. And she was a very fashionable girl, would wear tight jeans and would say, I can't put my finger into the jeans pocket because I've got a claw. And this girl went ahead with another surgery, had a recurrence of CRPS, which we again treated.
Achha, did you try radio frequency or alcohol injection or phenol to the stellate ganglion?
No. In CRPS
What is your
patients who have a long life expectancy, I will never go anywhere near them with a neurolytic block.
We have been doing, madam, with RF for the CRPS.
RF, yes, but I don't do at all.
We have published our paper in JATI, I think, series. Of course, all are CRPS2 because most of the patients are being referred by the neurosurgeon following brachial plexus injury. And we have given alcohol only 0.5 ml, exactly at the stellate ganglion, I mean C6 or C7 under fluoroscopic.
See, in the beginning of my work, I used to do stellate ganglion block with the idea that I want to break the sympathetic maintenance. But later I realized this is a somatic problem. CRPS is actually a somatic problem with sympathetic recruitment, which causes the sympathetic symptoms. So if you address the somatic part, which is muscle spasm, severe muscle spasm, which causes the destruction of the muscles, if you treat them with dry needling of muscles, the whole thing resolves completely. And this is a viewpoint I'm trying to sell to reviewers who have never held a needle in their hands. So they can't understand what I'm talking about. Because I have proposed a new theory of pathogenesis that actually CRPS is the result of co-contraction of the flexors and extensors of the fingers. And because both of them are pulling, there is tendinitis, tenosynovitis.
So the concept itself of sympathetic mediated independent itself is taken off.
It's completely taken off.
Taken off. But the question here is, what do we do for this people? If it works, it works. Sir. There's nothing wrong about it. No harm in trying it out.
Sympathetically maintained pain will respond to your ganglion block.
Yeah.
The sympathetically independent CRPS is the one which is very difficult to break. And I'm talking about breaking the cycle in sympathetically independent patients also. So whether it doesn't matter to me whether they are sympathetically dependent, maintained, whatever, they respond.
Yeah. Only I would like to send a message from this desk to all the youngsters, please do not inject alcohol or phenol around stellate ganglion, please. Yes. The cervical transverse is something like this. You just inject alcohol at the tip, it goes to the root. You end up managing some new problem. And second thing is, I don't know how much is genetically mediated CRPS. I had a patient, a lady whom I treated 8 years back, fracture something humerus. The fracture fixed and the radial nerve, what injury was forgotten. So she came with the entire picture CRPS and all, did a diagnosis with the stellate and she did very well. We did RF, fantastic. Only this particular tip of this finger, she said, is slightly numb, but rest of the hand is fine. Same lady, unfortunately, about 2 years back, she was going on a scooter along with maybe her daughter, she fell down and had her ankle fracture. She has again developed CRPS in that foot. The upper limb is recovered completely, but lower limb, we did again the thing. I would like to say, I'm just the same person. Unfortunate thing for the lady, like now we did again did a convention, all the treatment were done with all pharmacological and all. We did again the lumbar symptolysis with the CT guided and all. But the sympathetic component, now we are stuck with the somatic, probably what Madam is doing, that's what I'll have to try for that patient.
No, but this is very common and it's known in patients who develop CRPS, that you have one limb injury, CRPS, you have any other trivial injury anywhere else, any other limb, you will develop. We had a patient in UK who had CRPS one leg, underwent spinal cord stimulator implant, because that was has been accepted as treatment of choice for CRPS. She had that, she got it removed, leg never improved, she had it amputated. This is forcing surgeons to do things. And then a few days later, she walking on crutches, she twisted her other ankle and started developing it on the other leg. So they are known to have it. So there is probably something else going on which we don't know anything about.
CRPS spread is known. It has been described. It can spread from one limb to the other. It can spread to all four limbs. Here you have to look at the homunculus, the motor homunculus. The hands and feet are fairly close, and that is the reason which has been explained. And also the cerebral modification caused by the CRPS is also being described. I think the neurologists are having a, bonanza with this. They are describing all kinds of things, and mapping also they have shown that it changes. And incidentally, just to share, I have had a patient whom I had treated for CRPS. The lady had to go for another surgery as she had had an accident like this. And surprisingly, she didn't go for CRPS again. We were waiting for her, but she didn't come.
That's a good take, madam. Sir.
I just want to make a
Yeah.
very funny statement about use of stellate ganglion block. One of my plastic surgeons asked me, this young beautiful girl had a thyrotoxicosis and proptosis, and that was treated, but she proptosis continued. He said, why don't you try stellate ganglion block? And it worked as a process. And to my surprise, at it, when we repeated it, and till today, after 3-4 years, it is normal, I think.
Great. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience, please? Because we need to wind up. Almost 5-6 minutes were passed.
I think last for the CRPS2, if everything fails, one can try the IVRA. And particularly Reserpine we were doing
Yeah.
previously.
Madam, I have one last question for you. This is the last question about osteoarthritis knee. What we were doing the pulsed RF and all. How are the results in grade 4 osteoarthritis knee? Grade 4
Their
subluxated knee.
Their pain comes down. Their pain
Comes down.
Pain comes down.
But the
And,
results are much better in stage 3 probably for you.
No. See, there are, it's a very funny thing. The staging is done by Kellgren-Lawrence scaling.
Right.
That is, the grading is done for the X-ray of the knee. And the mild to moderate do excellently with our treatment. And some of these patients are also taken for surgery. And when they are taken for surgery, I'm just beginning to work up the series that when you do it in mild osteoarthritis surgery, they are the ones who are most likely to go for post-TKR pains. The severe, the subluxated ones, these patients do very well as far as pain is concerned. As is, where is, they become all right. But if they try to increase their activity,
It happens.
that endurance training,
Yeah,
they are
it
not
happens,
able to go through.
Yeah.
And having said that, my brother-in-law is grade 4 or 5, you can say. I have done the injection for him about 3 years ago. He is today walking 3 kilometers.
That's
and
more than
happy.
enough. That's
So
more than enough.
it is like patients differ
Yeah.
in this.
Same thing she's mentioning.
See, genicular branches RF, which has been described, I think it's a Korean paper. That is a CRF, that is conventional RF, where they have burnt the genicular nerves. What I am talking about is, I'm just talking about the PRF, pulsed RF, of all the nerves which supply the knee. So, genicular branches are supposed to innervate only the joint. Only the joint.
Yeah, Arun, I know. We have good chat over here. I know, understand. No, I understand. And please, feel free to express. Feel free to.
Now, if you look at what it was meant for, what it was meant to do, and how it's supposed to work, it's always talked about C protein modulation around a ganglion or
action, frankly speaking, is not known. There are theories, about 4 to 5 theories, and why it works is not known. But if you try it, you will see that immediately the people are very happy. Whether it is meant for a ganglion, whether it is meant for a nerve, what it does, 42 degrees, discharging a radio frequency energy around there, why it should work, we don't know. CFOS expression is just one of the theories. There are at least 3 or 4 more other theories. None of them make much sense to me, so I don't even remember them. But if you want, I have written it in my paper, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, one thing Arun, I just wanted to share with you. Somehow, I'm not convinced about pulse RF for the trigeminal. I cannot afford to get the patient back to the OR again. It's quite expensive affair. I would like to go with the conventional RF.
Incidentally,
Yeah.
I have seen 2 patients, not mine. Somebody else has done CRF, conventional RF of the trigeminal ganglion. Severe dysesthetic movements. Their mouth, face never keeps still. And they are so bitter about the person who did the
No,
RF for them.
it's a technical fault, madam. Let me, it's,
No. This
no,
incidentally.
why I'm trying to say is, no, not, let's not take the name, because why technical sometimes, we had one variation recently.
No, I will tell you, I want to clarify here.
Yeah.
The person who had done the RF for this lady is a person who has done 4,000 RFs for, I am not naming the person, he's a wonderful person and he's a neurosurgeon and he has 4,000 cases.
No, I agree. I'll tell you one more example. As I rightly said, technical for doesn't mean a needle. I'm talking about that. Recently, we had a patient where we had to do an RF trigeminal. The foramen oval had shifted by 8 millimeters laterally.
Incidentally, again,
8 millimeters.
I never do my trigeminal ganglion work under CIAM. I do it under CT, where they can do a reconstruct and show you the foramen oval, and I always enter the foramen oval there, under CT guidance.
8 millimeters away from original location. No, it does happen is what I'm trying to say, but it's sufficient, sir, it's sufficient. But still, as right, if it's not your day, and it just happens.
With the first I feel that we are doing less harm. There can be a chance of doing harm.
When they come back, they can't spend so much around again and again. I think we'll talk it over a cup of tea. Thank you so much for making the insights. Thank you everything. Thanks so much.